Hello, and thank you for joining today. My name is Stephanie Whitlin. I am one of the admissions officers at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, and I'm delighted today to be here to go through your journey from MENA to Stanford. We have a panel of recent alums who will be sharing their experience with you, and we're eager to get started. So for today's event, what we're really going to do is give you a brief introduction to the Stanford community, the GSB community. I want to introduce you to our panelists who will be speaking with you today and sharing their experience. We will be taking Q&A throughout the session. And if we don't get to any of your questions today, feel free to reach out to our admissions officers afterwards. You're certainly welcome to do so, and email us at any time. We're here to help you through your journey. As we look at this opportunity, what I wanted to share most importantly is the global community that awaits you. So the Stanford GSB is very focused on creating a diverse class, and that's diverse in the broadest sense of the term, both culturally, background, socioeconomic status, ethnicity. And so we really do appreciate individuals coming with different perspectives, experiences, and backgrounds. We have over 43% of our class are international students representing 66 countries. And this is for the class of MBA 2021, and over 70 languages spoken. So the broad experience that you might have is certainly worth considering. There are a number of clubs and organizations that we have on campus as well. Certainly want to highlight the Middle East North Africa Club, the MENA Club, for those of you who are interested in getting involved. And again, I want to take this opportunity to welcome our panelists who have joined us today. Khulud and Yasmin, thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here. I will start with Khulud, since you're first on the slide. If you wouldn't mind just giving a brief background to introduce yourself, I'd appreciate that.
Of course, thank you, Stephanie, and welcome everyone. My name is Khulud Al-Dabal, and I'm from Saudi Arabia. Prior to GSB, I was working in Aramco, which is Saudi's oil company. I was working at their corporate venture capital arm, so investing in technologies, mainly in oil and gas. After GSB, I worked for a year in a venture capital firm in Silicon Valley. Then I came back to Saudi, and now I'm working in NEOM, which is the new futuristic city that Saudi Arabia is building, and mainly focused on tech and innovation.
Thank you so much. I have so many questions for you as it relates to that, but that's not what this session is for. So let's move on to Yasmin. Thank you for being here and welcome.
Of course, thank you for having us. So as Stephanie mentioned, I'm Yasmin. I graduated from the GSB in 2018, so I was just a year ahead of Khulud. I'm originally from Egypt. I moved to the US for the GSB, so I was living in Cairo right before starting the program. I worked for Citadel Capital, which was a private equity firm based in Egypt, operating throughout North and East Africa for 6 years prior to joining the GSB. And since graduating, I have transitioned into tech. So I'm a senior product manager at Pinterest, which is a tech company that you may have heard of, based out of San Francisco.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you both so much for being here. What really got you thinking about Stanford, especially coming from the MENA region? If you can just share what that experience was like, or how you explored the GSB as a possible option for you. Khulud, do you mind starting?
Happy to. I think for me, my background was in entrepreneurship and venture capital. So I was kind of well aware of Silicon Valley. And I knew that I wanted to go to Stanford early on. So it was a top priority from the point of applying or starting the whole MBA application process. Plus, I think one thing that maybe made me kind of turn more towards Stanford is I had a lot of alumni around me from leaders or managers in the places that I worked with, or like, let's say, community activities. So I think I was just well aware of the values of the school, and it was definitely my first option going into the whole process.
Okay, great, thank you. Yasmin, anything to add for you coming from Egypt?
Yeah, sure. Mine was a little different, actually. So as I mentioned, I worked in financial services, and I grew up in Dubai and then was living in Egypt. And for the majority of my life, there were like 3 general tracks that people took for their careers. Like, you either became a physician or an engineer, or you worked in business finance in some regard. And the impetus for me to go to grad school was to actually figure out if financial services was the place I actually wanted to be, or did I just like end up there because I wasn't an engineer and I wasn't a doctor. And so the reason I chose the GSB specifically is because I wanted to abstract away from the confines of like what success is defined as, where I'm from, like where Egypt is, because those are basically the 3 industries. And so I felt like the GSB was the furthest thing away from what I'm accustomed to, and like would really stretch my thinking. There were other schools I was considering that I felt like I would probably end up doing what I knew how to do well, which was financial services at the time. And so it wasn't as intentional as me saying like, I want to break into tech, therefore I will go to the GSB, but it was like the GSB is going to give me that exposure to all these different types of roles and jobs and industries that I've never come close to. And that exploration was really the appeal for me.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I think what I'll do now to make this just a little bit more intimate so we can see one another, I'm going to stop my screen, and so that it'll just be the 3 of us, and that'll be a little bit easier for folks to see as well. I'll still take questions. So for those of you who have joined us today, please do add any questions that you might have for Khulud or Yasmin in the Q&A box. So I appreciate you both sharing your experience of exploring why Stanford. Could you tell me what the culture shift might have looked like for you once you joined the community coming from the MENA region? Was there anything that was a surprise? Anything you could share with the community that might be helpful as they're exploring making that kind of shift to come to the US for their graduate degree? Yasmin, do you want to start? Do you have anything?
Sure. It's a tough question. I think there are a lot of, so at the very baseline level, there's a lot of cultural references I didn't know when I moved to the US. I don't know that it's unique to the GSB, but I think it's just like moving to a new country. There are also a lot of like norms, like 12 p.m. lunchtime blew my mind. Where I'm from, we don't eat at noon. Like we have lunch at like 4. So there were just like small things that you sort of like adjust to. My biggest adjustment is when I first moved to the US, someone asked me if I like the outdoors, and I was like, sure, I like to sit on the beach and ride a bike. And they meant like mountain climbing. And so that's like a big thing in California. And so my definition of the outdoors was really different. So there are a lot of like cute little things. But then I think probably one of the bigger things was demeanor in class. So where I went to school as a kid, you sort of were quiet in class. Like you sat down, you took notes, you didn't really speak unless you had a question. Like that was really like, you didn't understand something, that's when you would raise your hand and talk. Whereas the GSB really has this culture of participation and actively speaking and debating in class, which was very different than anything I had ever been exposed to. And I think there was like a decent adjustment for me in my first quarter to just actually speak up in class, because it wasn't like second nature to me at all.
Great point. Thank you.
One thing to add on, so I fully agree with Yasmin on like the structure or the format of teaching is very different in the US from the Middle East. One thing on the cultural aspect, I think coming to GSB, I was very worried about spending Ramadan, let's say the month of Ramadan, which we usually fast in. I was very worried about how am I going to spend it alone as a student. And it turned out to be one of the best experiences I had, because we made a pact amongst like us, the MENA club group, of no one having to do to break their fast alone. And we ended up forming kind of a community or a bond with not just like Muslims or people from the MENA, but everyone across the schools started joining. So until today, I actually remember these days. And I think it's kind of part of sharing our culture with the students across the university.
Thank you. To add to that, is there anything you might share with the audience or the attendees about advice as they're thinking about the transition? Maybe anything that, as you're looking back, best prepared you, other than, you know, keeping an open mind and knowing what the culture of the GSB offers?
I think mine was, if you end up at the GSB, don't be afraid to share who you are and where you're from. I think it took me a while to like very openly talk about being Egyptian, what that meant for me as a person, what that meant for me as someone who doesn't drink. And there's just like a lot of things about me that I sort of like kept guarded at first, because I was like, oh, I just want to fit in and like I want, you know, to like feel like I'm the same as everyone around me. But it's actually like it's a very unique time in my life where like people really want to know the unique things about you, and they're so interested to learn about where you're from and like what makes you you. And that's honestly the most beautiful thing about the GSB and that community. And so it wasn't until I did my talk. So there's this thing that if you talk to anyone who went to the GSB, they'll talk to you about, which is called Talk, where you basically get up in front of your classmates and share your life story. And it could be whatever it is you want. And it's a very intimate setting with 300 of your closest friends. And you just share your story. And I talked about living through the Egyptian Revolution and what that did to me and my family. And it just like changed my experience at the GSB when I opened up, and people who I'd been hanging out with for a very long time didn't know anything about me or that background. And I feel like that was the thing that sort of transitioned me into actually just being like, you know what, I'm just going to own where I'm from and who I am as a person. And it brought me closer to people who were already my friends. And honestly, just made me a lot more comfortable with who I am. So like, don't feel like you need to conform at the GSB or anywhere, honestly, but especially at the GSB.
It's a really thoughtful reflection, because I do believe that many students, regardless of your background or experience, come to the GSB and have a lot to offer, which is why we have you as part of the class. We know that you'll contribute to that patchwork, and I'm glad to hear that you were able to, certainly share that part of you with the rest of the community. Khalid, would you have anything to add to that in terms of looking back on your transition and what that was like?
I think for me, it was, I was at the GSB at a time where it was also very critical for Saudi, as it was going through major reforms. In fact, in my first week of GSB was when Saudi lifted the ban of women driving. So I think for me, it was a tough 2 years where Saudi was in the media, whether on positive or negative. And I think it was mainly like, I don't think I was still comfortable like talking in public about it yet. I enjoyed having one-on-one conversations with students. And in my my first year, I actually had, or second year, I had one of my classmates come back with me to Saudi during winter break, and taking her across, and for me as well, it was experiencing a new Saudi because there are a lot of reforms at the time. So I think just sharing a bit of home with students was very meaningful for me.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and take some questions from the Q&A. One that's kind of popped up at the top asks about being able to briefly indicate how your MBA helped you to do your respective shift. And I presume that they are referring to your shift in industry. Can either of you speak to that? I know you both kind of adjusted where you were previously to where you currently are. So how did the GSB help you make that shift? Yasmin, I'll start with you. If you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there is no doubt in my mind that there's 100% no way I would have been where I am right now had I not gone to Stanford. The reason being, while I was in Egypt, well, one, I didn't know what I wanted to do, right? So like the concept of tech or like breaking into tech wasn't even a thought that I had. So having that exposure was something that I got through my summer internship, through talking to people in my class who came from that industry, from talking to alumni, from talking to career advisors at the GSV. So all those conversations sort of helped me figure out what it is I wanted to test or potentially do next once I graduated. So that was the first thing. The second thing is when you work in the MENA region or any other area outside of the US, moving into a US job is pretty difficult for many reasons, most notably because of visa reasons. And so I think being at the GSB and having the benefit of OPT, which is, I forget what it stands for, optional practical training, I think, allows you to secure a job essentially 1 year or depending on your degree, maybe more after graduation. So that was another like benefit of pursuing a graduate degree. And third, and quite honestly, most importantly, even if you're a US citizen living in the MENA region and you're trying to move over, sorry about that, it's actually really hard to break into these jobs, especially if you're transitioning your industry. Like if I was going from PE to PE, maybe I'd have a better chance. But if I'm trying to break into a new industry where I don't necessarily have the relevant experience, that's really difficult. And that's where the alumni network was my saving grace. Like I emailed people who went to the GSB, who had those jobs or who had done similar transitions, talked to them, got advice from them. A lot of them referred me for roles. And so recruiting just like is very different because you need to get your foot in the door. And I don't think you can do that if you're kind of like, you don't have access to that network. So for all of those reasons, I don't think I could have gotten this job. And when I was based in Egypt, I was even trying to just same industry. Like I wasn't even trying to change my industry, just move out of the country. It was impossible. Like I couldn't even land an interview at the time, and it was really difficult.
Thank you for sharing. Thanks. Yeah, cool.
I think for me, it was more of the decision of whether I wanted to stay in the US or come back to Saudi afterwards. And initially I was like, I'm gonna test out the US and we'll see, maybe it's for me and maybe I want to stay for a while. And then I realized that with the reforms that are happening in Saudi, I actually wanted to be part of it. So I decided to come back after it. I agree in terms of the alumni network. In Saudi, there's a very strong alumni community. In fact, I'm in the board of the Stanford Alumni Club in Saudi. So it was definitely, it just made the whole career navigation process way easier because you have you will find an alumni in every institution in Saudi. So definitely that was a big help.
That's great. I know there have been a couple questions related to that, both why you returned to the region, and then were you able, or did you reach out to GSB alumni in the region for your move back to MENA? So Khulud, this would be most, and how did you connect? How can you talk a little bit about how that works, especially for people who might be concerned if they do come to the US but want to return?
Yes. So for me, I got connected with alumni from when I was in school. So during alumni events, usually the alumni network at Saudi would reach out to students that are at Stanford. So you get to meet a lot of alums that come to campus. And that actually was the first thing that kind of started conversations. And then and even if you don't have that, let's say that doesn't happen, reaching out to the alumni, the Student Alumni Association, they will connect you with the club in the region. And then they straight away connect you with any alum that will then know where you want to go or what you're interested in, and will connect you to the relevant people. I think one thing that we are starting, at least in these Stanford Alumni Club in Saudi Arabia, is like a career or let's say mentoring kind of program where we have like we send out names of recent grads, or if someone wants to do a career shift later on, we kind of do like roundtable discussions around specific interests, and that's kind of then you can take that further to land in an opportunity.
Great. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear you're active out there and playing an active role in the alumni organization. We put in the chat, because Yasmin, you made the comment about OPT. Just so you're all aware, the MBA program is now STEM eligible. So yes, it used to be a year. Now, depending on your situation, you can actually stay in the US for up to 3 years or 36 months. So that is an improvement over time. Can you talk a little bit about what the experience was like in finding a summer internship? I'm not sure if I collected information about that from either of you. So the year between your first and second year, what did you explore, either as it relates to the transition you made into the career you're currently at, or was it just an opportunity to dabble in something else? I'd love to know what that experience was like and how you navigated that process. Yasmin, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So I wanted to try to do tech in my summer internship. That was like the first, that was the idea that I had, at least going into it. So on-campus recruiting starts pretty early. And what that means is like some companies, mostly like larger brands that you may be aware of, and like investment banks and consulting firms will come to the GSB and actually do their interviews on campus, and you can talk to them, et cetera. So I skipped that. I was just like, I know this is not what I want, so I'm not gonna spend my energy there. And that happens early, so it starts creating a little bit of anxiety when you start hearing that your friends already know what they're doing for internship here. But I was just like, I'm gonna stay true to what I'm here to do. And then finding an internship in tech is sometimes more difficult. If you're looking at like an Amazon, which is like a very large company, and they have established processes for taking on interns every summer, that's much easier. But that's not what I wanted either. So I was really, making my life really difficult for myself and bugging the career management office a lot with my problems, and they were always super helpful. But essentially what I ended up doing is having a short list of tech companies that I wanted to try to intern at, and that made it a little focused for me. And then when I got nervous in the middle, I tried to also recruit for a finance internship just to be on the safe side. I don't recommend it. It was a little stressful. But ultimately, I ended up getting an internship at a PE fund, which made no sense. And the career office told me, this makes no sense. You shouldn't go there because you know how to do PE. And then I ended up getting an internship at Cruise. They are a self-driving car company based out of San Francisco. And I worked on their commercialization team, which is essentially the team that was trying to determine once self-driving cars are actually a fleet and they exist and they're authorized, which they currently are in San Francisco at least, how would we monetize them? And the way I got that internship actually was through one of the people who work at the CMC. So one of the advisors that I was talking to pretty regularly just so happened to be talking to a alum of the GSB who was heading up that team at Cruise. And she was like, I need someone with a financial background who can also do strategy. And I did private equity and consulting. So she was like, I have the perfect person. And she introduced us and I interviewed and I got the internship. So it was, I like to call it a favor from the CMC. I'm sure there was a little bit of luck there, but very long story short, it was a lot of work. But I think if you decide to stay focused on what it is that you want or what you're hoping to do, and then really lean on the career management office, they can really, really help you, especially if you don't have an existing network in the industry that you want to break into or in the US broadly, which I had neither, honestly.
Yeah, thank you. So CMC is the Career Management Center. Yes, and it cannot be overstated that it's a great resource. Khulud, what was your experience like in that same transition as an internship?
So I knew, coming from a corporate venture capital arm, I knew that I wanted to stay in venture capital, yet I didn't want to be in oil and gas or energy. I wanted to try something new. So I started navigating the process, and honestly, I got one of the students at GSB introduced me to GP, and that's how I got to know the fund that I ended up interning at. And it was more like sector agnostic and more early stage. So it kind of fit well into what I was looking for. So got to have multiple conversations with a GP and then made the decision that I'll intern that summer. And I ended up working in that fund after graduation.
Okay, all right, very good. I know we've talked a lot about the work experience, that transition and so forth. I want to move a little bit into something about the experience when you were at the GSB. Did either of you participate in MENA, the club? And if so, what could you share? And then maybe more broadly too, what other clubs and activities did you get involved in while you were at the GSB? Yasmin, you want to, I saw you both shake your heads, so clearly, yeah, I'm sure you participated. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on both the MENA club and then other things that you might have been involved in?
Sure. So I was on the leadership team of the MENA club my second year at the GSB. And what that meant is we led the club. We, myself and two other people in my class, one person was from Palestine and one person was from Lebanon. And what that meant is we organized small group dinners where we did things with our class, but also with alumni who would come back to the Bay Area, as Khulud mentioned. We did Fitr during Ramadan, which is like when people break their fast. And this, like Khulud mentioned, it wasn't like just us, just the people from MENA. It was literally like a lot of people across our class. And we shared things like that we usually watch, food that we typically eat, that kind of stuff, and really brought a piece of home to school with us. We, not through the club, but because so many people had been interested in the club, it kind of gave birth to a Lebanon trip that happened. And then I did an Egypt trip for 35 of my classmates. These are unofficial trips, not sponsored by the GSB in any way, but sort of because the community was created and people were so interested in the region, we actually took people back. And then we did a few things around just like charity drives and just like sharing about some of the issues that are happening in the Middle East. So I specifically sit on a foundation for a charity in Egypt that a lot of people were actually super interested in dedicating some time to. And so I sort of like played that connector role. And then we played a lot of roles in admit weekend. So this is when people who are incoming to the GSB come to campus to visit the campus, learn about the school, learn about the program, meet their future classmates. And so we sort of had a booth. We welcomed everyone who was from the MENA region as well as from all other regions. We had dinners with them, shared our experiences with them, and sort of like helped welcome them in the same way that when I joined or when I was coming to Admit Weekend, the folks from MENA up like the year ahead of me did the same thing. And we stayed close with them when they started. And I think that's how Khulud and I actually met, if I'm remembering correctly, but I'm not 100% sure. Right? That was how we met. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah.
I think the first time was like a MENA club dinner or something.
Yeah. So like it's nice because when you move to a new country, it's super daunting, but like you know that you already have a MENA family kind of waiting for you to welcome you and like help you. And it's when you first get to the GSB, it's a beautiful feeling, but there's a lot of information being thrown at you, and you're also moving halfway across the world for some people. So it was like a very nice thing for us to offer because we had already been there for a year and like we know what's going on, and you can see the fear in people's eyes. So yeah.
Great.
One thing that we did in our year is we did the Stanford MENA Forum, which was a full day forum in which we hosted leaders from MENA, from public or private institutions, also entrepreneurs, kind of leaders of change from MENA to come and speak with Stanford students. And then we had a session that was more focused on art, culture, and food. And it was just, it's actually one of probably the most meaningful experiences that I got out of the MENA Club, because it turned out into more of like a networking also for people from MENA or students from MENA. So yeah.
That's great. There is a question, Khulud, for you in the Q&A, which asks, how did the Stanford MBA prepare you to move from VC in MENA, or VC in MENA, to VC in the Bay Area? And can you talk a little bit about the recruitment support? I know we've talked a little bit, but is there anything else you might share about how you made that transition into the region here?
Yes, I think what's interesting about the region here is that, or specifically, let's say the GCC, is that there's a lot of changes that are happening and a lot of reforms and tech adoption. And I think one thing that I was able to position myself in is how to bring in these technologies to the region. So in a lot of ways, connecting them with, let's say, the network that I used to have prior to GSB in the region, and bringing in these technologies, so more like technology adoption. And I think that was, that's mainly what helped me break into VC in Silicon Valley, coming from GCC.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. Well, this is somewhat of an application question, but it's something that's on their minds. Osama asks, what's one piece of advice you'd share with applicants working on their What Matters Most essay for submission, or maybe just general guidance on how you approach that part of the application?
I can start. That essay is probably one of the hardest things I've had to do, not because it's a hard prompt per se, but I was not a reflective person before I started at the GSB, and I wrote many drafts of that essay that went in very different directions. And I think if I were to think back, the one piece of advice I would give is just be super honest with yourself. Don't try to write an essay that you think is gonna look good or is what you think the school wants to hear. Because I can tell you, I don't work in admissions. No one who has ever been to the GSB knows what admissions wants to hear. They actually just want you to be honest about yourself. So don't try to make it look, like impressive or like, here are all the things I've achieved, because they can see that from your resume and from your application itself. And I think after having met my classmates and like learning about them and what their stories are, my guess is like it really was shining through in their application. So just be superbly honest, actually, with yourself, and like really enjoy the exercise if you're not a reflective person, to actually dig deep and figure out what does matter to you most, and just don't be afraid to start over with your essay like many times if you don't think it's right, and have close people who know you really well as a person, not like your manager at work, like your friends, people in your family, read your essay and like tell you if that really does feel like you are coming across on this piece of paper. Because for me, that was what really helped. Like if I could show you some of the drafts of my essays, it was pretty like not great in the beginning, and like you couldn't tell anything about me as a person. But my final version that I like actually submitted, to this day, I read and I cry every time I read it. So it like, not because of tragedy in my life or anything, but like, because I really did see the progression in my drafts of me really figuring out what my story is or what I want it to be. And so just really embrace the exercise.
Excellent advice. I'm not sure I could say it any better myself when we talk on the road too about giving pointers. Khulud, anything to add for you as you were going through that exploratory phase?
Honestly, no, I echo what Yasmin said 100%. Just be authentic and genuine to yourself.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I always say as an admissions officer that right, for someone who is genuinely interested in wanting to learn about who you are, right? So we really do, there's a human reading that essay, and it is not right to impress, but right as if someone is genuinely wanting to learn about the person that you are. And it is very reflective and can take some time. And I do agree, I've been on the road and heard from a number of alums over the years that if you do it properly, it is the kind of essay that if you go back and read, that it hopefully is something that is so near and dear and core to who you are, that it is a thread that follows you throughout your life. And it's nice to be able to reflect on that and look back on that. So thanks for sharing. Let's see, I'm trying to think if there's anything that I've missed here that would be most important. There's certainly a lot of questions about how to connect with alums in the MENA region. What I can say, of course, is that, well, and I'll let you add, Khulud, but certainly if you're admitted to the MBA program, we are open to enabling you to speak with students and alums, and certainly the communities are very strong. And so is there anything else that you might add, Khulud, in terms of communicating or connecting with the alumni organization?
Nothing to add, but if it's in our region and they want to connect to me, happy to do that. So that could be a way. Usually it comes, if someone from the school is connecting, usually it comes from the Stanford Students Association.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question that just came in from Syed. It says, I'm from Iran and I'm really concerned about sanctions and political conflicts between the US and Iran. And there are certainly challenges as it relates to the visa process. Can you, either of you, speak to what that, even just like what the experience was like for you? Obviously you both applied pre-pandemic, so there's a few things that might be a little bit more challenging right now, but maybe just elaborating on what that process was like for you in obtaining a visa.
I'm happy to share. So Egypt is not in the same situation as Iran, obviously. So applying for the visa was fine and straightforward. I will say that while I was at the GSB, and I don't know if this ran until when Khulud had started, but there was a period of time where the US government had sanctioned some countries beyond just Iran, right? Like they had several countries. In Egypt was not on the initial list, but there was talks of it like potentially being added to that list. A lot of my classmates were from countries, so we had Iraqi classmates who were on that list and they weren't allowed. And we also had someone from Yemen. And so I will say, like, and this is just my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt, the world is like a very interesting place right now, especially layered in with a pandemic. And these types of circumstances are sort of like out of everyone's control. What I will tell you is, once we were at the GSB, there were many, many, many resources for us to lean on. It's unfortunate you end up in a situation where the International Student Office, which is outside of the GSB, sort of like governs all of international students at Stanford. Their guidance was like, hey, just be super conservative with your travel decisions right now, because Egypt might not be on this list today, but you may decide to travel and then have issues coming back to the US. And so we advise you to, exercise caution and perhaps not travel, but they were available. They consulted with us when we had issues, when we had visa questions or problems, they were there. Now, this is not about getting you to the GSB. I'm sure you can speak to them in advance of applying, and I'm sure they will support you to the best of their abilities. But visa problems and travel restrictions are just an unfortunate reality for our region. And I will say that, like, it's at least comforting to know that there are resources at Stanford that will help you. These people have a lot of experience with these types of issues. Specifically, I remember there was a classmate of ours who traveled during winter break and had some issue actually re-entering the US. I forget what the exact problem was. And they, like, the students rallied and we reached out to the International Student Center and we got them the help that they needed. So there are a lot of people who want to help you. So I think it's just a matter of getting there and also deciding whether you think you can, adjust.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Anything else, Khalid, from your experience, or does it sound okay? Yeah. So I would love to understand from you, as you thought about your launchpad for your future, how you weighed the cost and benefits of either staying in the US or returning to the MENA region. How did you explore that as you were thinking about launching after your GSB career? I know, Yasmin, you're here in the US, but Khalid is back in Saudi Arabia. So you both have interesting perspectives to share on that. Khalid, why don't we start with you, since you did go back to the region, if there was anything that was compelling for you to do so, or how you weighed that after the GSB.
Yeah, I think for me, it also goes back to what matters most to you and why. And I guess because I went to the GSB at a time where there were just a lot of reforms that are happening, and kind of this dream that I always had started happening while I was at GSB. And I felt like I was missing out on that. And it felt like it's an exciting time to go home. And that actually made it much more. And so, like, when I was in the US, although I did feel like I was kind of happy and everything, yet I didn't feel like I felt like I could do more, let's say. And that mainly kind of shaped my decision to go back.
And Yasmin, for you, what has it been that compelled you to stay, at least for the short term?
Yeah, so I knew before I even started the GSB that I didn't want to go back to Egypt. I had worked in Dubai as well as Cairo. And honestly, I just, I didn't want to go back. So I knew that going in, and I think that gave me some luxuries in terms of decisions that I made. So I ended up taking on student debt to pay for a portion of my GSB tuition which if I knew that I wanted to go back to to Egypt or to the Middle East, that would have been a harder sell for me personally, because the Egyptian pound, the year I started at the GSB, devalued 65% against the US dollar. So if I had taken dollar denominated debt and moved back home, that would have been the most expensive degree probably in the history of time. And so I sort of like, because I knew that I wanted to stay, I was like, you know what, I can afford to take dollar denominated debt. Which I then paid off once I started. And I think there was a question that someone asked around like fellowships and scholarships. I don't think there's a dedicated GSB one. There is financial aid, which I'm sure Stephanie can tell you all about. Stanford is incredibly generous with their financial aid, and it's need-based. So that really helped me, especially because my home country's currency had just devalued. So my income actually just like looked really small on my application because the currency had plummeted. There is an Africa-based fellowship that Stanford, I believe, offers that I think Ahmed in Khulud's class actually got, as well as fellowships that you can get in your home countries. So Egypt, for example, has like an Erasmus fellowship that people often take. So there are many opportunities for scholarships, I think, whether through Stanford or otherwise. Most of them require you to go back to the region. So if you are planning to go back to the region, then you absolutely should apply to those. But because I knew I didn't want to, then my main outlet was financial aid, my savings, and then debt, which I then chose to take on because I knew I was staying.
What I can elaborate on is we actually have a fellowship available called the Bold Fellows Program, and it is an opportunity for individuals broadly defined in terms of diversity to contribute. So we have sunsetted the Stanford Africa program that you had spoken about, but that does not mean that there still aren't other fellowship funds available. And absolutely, as Yasmin mentioned, we are a need-based financial aid program. And so from that perspective, yes, we certainly will work with you to make sure that it is something that you can afford. One other, well, so I wanted to kind of, it hasn't been asked by the candidates in the Q&A, but wanted to hear from you if you could just talk about maybe your favorite either experience and or class that you took while at the GSB. I always think it's fun to get sort of a taste of what the experience for you and what was most important, or maybe either most enjoyable or most important to you, most meaningful. Khalud, do you want to start with that one? Anything you can think of?
Sure. So I think for me, it was, I would say, between the art of self-coaching and touchy-feely. And those classes, I think they're, I think I use them until this day, but I think for me, it contributed to the most growth that happened at the GSB. Whether it's learning about, actually mainly it was learning about myself, my strengths and my weaknesses, and how can I bring that in my daily life or also the corporate world. And I think it's what I learned from these classes are things that I use every day. The art of self-coaching with Ed Barista, I mean, I got into this habit of reflection and journaling that I still do today. So yeah, so for me, those two classes.
Great. Thank you. Yasmin, how are you?
Mine were, so I took this class called Rethinking Purpose, which was a bridged class. And I think it really helped me. It was sort of why I went to grad school. It was just like, I need to figure out what I care about and what I want to do with my life beyond just like the job that I have. So that class really, really helped me and gave me the tools to figure that out. And then the other one, sort of similar to one of the classes Khulud mentioned, was Managing Difficult Conversations. And that class it sort of like stretched my thinking around how to like lead through influence as opposed to leading because you manage the person. And it has been invaluable as a product manager because I actually have to influence all of these people I work with, but none of them actually report to me. So I can't sort of, exercise authority on anyone. And it just has given me a bunch of soft skills that I had never been exposed to or, even thought I needed prior to taking the class. And so, yeah, I manage, quote unquote, a team of 12 people completely through influence. And without that class, I don't think I could have done that.
Yeah, there's quite a few opportunities for reflection and all of that while you're at the GSB for sure, which kind of leads us to probably our final question that I'll ask of each of you, which was posted in the Q&A. What would you say are the strengths of the GSB MBA program, or what have they been for you as you reflect now on your experience? What were those for you? Yasmin, you want to start? Yeah.
Sure. 100%. It is the soft skills and learning about interpersonal dynamics. Like I just, for what it's worth, I got into 3 different programs and went to 3 different admit weeks for those programs. And most schools have amazing curriculums, amazing professors, they're amazing brands, like the marginal difference is really small. What I didn't see anywhere else outside of the GSB was really these soft skill classes, like the sheer number of them, the people who come and teach them, they're just completely different than anything you will take at any other school. And so that I thought was, and it's kind of why if you talk to anyone in their second year, which is when they take electives and they start getting exposure to these classes, is when people fall in love with the GSB and what it means to be there. And then the other thing I will say is the ability to take classes, we call them across the street classes. So I have an interest in medicine. So I actually took a bunch of classes that counted towards my degree at the Stanford School of Medicine. And I don't think I would have ever had the opportunity to do that at any other school. So in my mind, those are probably the 2 largest selling points.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. One thing that I'll add is that GSB has a very collaborative culture. So let's say any new idea you have, you can, like, amongst your class, you can get like 10 people that have worked in that industry that will discuss it with you. And I think it has this very unique culture of let's create something collaboratively. So I definitely think that's one of the also selling points for GSB.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. We are at time. It was so wonderful to hear both of your stories, your insights, your perspective, and your advice. So thank you for sharing with the audience. And to all of you who joined today, thank you for taking time, whether it was morning, afternoon, evening, or otherwise for you. We appreciate you making time in your day to join us. And again, Yasmin and Khulud, thank you. It was wonderful to hear from you and wishing you all the best. So have a wonderful day and thanks again.